Hi, everyone. My name's Conor Boyle, and as you heard, I work for the ILO IFC Better Work program. Really excited to be here today. We've got a very large panel, as you can see, so we're going to try and move things through relatively quickly, make sure that everyone gets at least a chance to speak, and I'm even going to try and create a little bit of space so that all of you can ask us some questions as well. A big shout out, of course, to our Bangladeshi colleagues, and particularly Mustafiz for organizing today's event. Also a big shout out to the Dutch government for helping to organize the event, and also because the Dutch have been a tremendous partner to Better Work over the last decade plus, and have been one of our key funders. So all of that. So just to set a little bit of the frame, and then we're going to go and ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and to answer a few questions. As you know, it's really all about advancing safety and well-being for the garment workforce in Bangladesh. I think we would all acknowledge that some tremendous stuff has happened, particularly since the tragedies of Rana Plaza in 2013. But since then, with the Accord, with the Alliance, with other organizations working together, Bangladesh is, without a doubt, a much more safe environment to operate in. We've seen increases in working conditions, and some of my panel members will speak to that, improvements in working conditions. We've seen space opening up for women. Our research shows that about 55 to 60% of the industry are women. They're not represented enough on this panel. They haven't been represented in this morning's panels as well. But I think we have a very important obligation to speak on behalf of the young women in our industry. There has been space that has opened up for freedom of association and collective bargaining as well, and social dialogue. And yet I think we would all agree that more has to happen in that space as well. And I'll ask my panel members to speak to that. So more needs to be done. Social protection is also something that's taken off. We've got a great pilot in Bangladesh, working with a number of brand partners, the ILO and the government of Bangladesh and others. Again, good steps in the right direction. But as we heard this morning, salaries remain very low compared to other countries. Wage discrimination for women is still very, very high. There is not, I would say, an overly strong appetite yet for freedom of association and collective bargaining. I think there's more work that we can do there. But we also heard in a number of panels the importance of collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. So what does that mean? And how do we make that not just be a nice term, but how do we actually ensure that we're all collaborating, that the national constituents and social partners on the ground, that the private sector are all collaborating, and that these relationships are built on trust. And I think that's a key point as well. We need to invest in people, particularly in women. We need to protect labor rights. Hopefully we'll also tease out a little bit about the whole idea of human rights and due diligence, the regulation, something that is, I believe personally, an opportunity for all of us to move things forward. Anyway, enough of me speaking. I'm going to turn to the panel. Just introduce yourselves. I'll throw a question at you, and introduce yourselves and do your best to answer the question, and we'll see how we go. Okay? So Jeanette, I'm going to start with you. Priority steps that are needed to strengthen OSH, occupational safety and health systems, whether it's in monitoring or remediation for the industry. What are your thoughts, please?
Yeah, so firstly, an introduction about myself. My name is Jeanette Mensink. I know most of you, well, that's a bit of an overstatement, but I know many of you, and happy to be here. I work for the SLCP, Social Labor Convergence Program. And SLCP was built a couple of years ago, short introduction, with the idea to reduce social audits. And I think much of the audience here, particularly the Bangladesh manufacturers, can feel for that. There was a lot of repetitive audits. Well, actually, we would like to get to a place where we spend our energy and time on improving labor conditions rather than doing the same thing over and over again. So we built what we now call the Converged Assessment Framework, which is a measurement tool to assess and have an understanding on the labor conditions, and we can share the data. With that, the progress that we've been able to make since 2019 when we started the implementation, we also now have an additional opportunity because we have an pool of credible and actionable data that all of the stakeholders can use to really drive that change that is needed. I think, so then I come to your question, Conor. So I think it's not a secret that this industry is dealing with a couple of challenges when it comes to labor conditions. Also, what we see from our data, still more than 90% of the factories, there is a violation of even the labor law, and the highest that come in place are occupational health and safety. We're speaking to that, wages and working hours. Particularly for Bangladesh, if we're putting it in that context, my colleagues have been kind enough to put a couple of the data from Bangladesh from last year. More than 600 factories from Bangladesh are in our system already right now. So I think we can also, with some confidence, use that and say something about it. So the good news is that there is a relatively high compliance on cleanliness, building safety, I think much to the credit of the Accord, for instance, emergency preparedness, and establishment of occupational health and safety committees. We see also that digitalization of wages, which was even a couple of years ago, which was hardly there, we see now that that's up to a level of 90% almost. At the same time, there's also areas for improvement. And as much as there is, say, the policy is in place for occupational health and safety, we see that at least 93% of the factories, there is still even legal non-compliance on that. And that some examples of that, noises, fire safety permits, obstructed emergency exits. So they're there, but they're still, you can't use them if you're at the work floor. And then the worker committees, they're there, but the dialogue between the management and the worker committee is not always optimal. Also, maybe following the discussion from this morning, though we're talking here about occupational health and safety, occupational health and safety is very much related to the other things, so wages, it is related to working hours, and underlying of that is, say, the prices and the dynamics in the supply chain. Enabling factors need to be there. So that's one piece if you're talking about the priorities. I think structurally we need to start there, but then also building on the priorities of the issues that we want to solve. I just gave some examples, and if I can maybe make a last statement on it, I think addressing these topics in isolation by one single stakeholder is not going to work. You need a systemic solution. All these issues are interconnected. And you need dialogue between management and the workers, but also in the supply chain. We all have a responsibility in that.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeanette. You picked up on a lot of different things there, but what I'd like to do is zoom in a little bit and actually hand it to you, Peter, if I could. Jeanette talked about the importance of the worker committees and worker voice and things like that, but said there's a ways to go. So if you want to build on that a little bit and tell us a little bit about worker voice, worker representation, and tell us who you are, Peter.
Thanks, Conor.
Just in case you forgot.
Is this working? Yes, it is. So my name is Peter McAllister. I'm the Executive Director of the Ethical Trading Initiative, based in London, but we operate globally wherever our member supply chains are, and we bring together companies, suppliers, trade unions, and NGOs, and working very much on this area. So we were talking about well-being, and at the heart of well-being has to be the people whose voice needs to be heard. You know, it's not for us to decide what the priorities are for workers in Bangladesh or Turkey or wherever. So at the core of that concept needs to be a dialogue. Now, that's better if it's organized, it's better if it's structured, if there are trade unions present, they are the social partners. So at the core of well-being in terms of factory level, and if you elevate that then at national level, should be a regular process of dialogue in terms of what's important. In the current circumstances that we're in, where there are economic pressures both at producer level and at typically consumer countries, that's even more vital. Because absent that, we run the risk of disputes running out of control or problems escalating rather than being part of a process where there's an opportunity to share perspectives, to think about alternatives, and then to create constructive solutions. And we know it works because we've demonstrated it. So although there are committees often indicated by law and policy, actually the investment in making those work and making them meaningful takes time. It takes commitment from the ownership, it takes involvement of the workers, and it also takes a certain amount of courage because it's not the normal way. Yet actually we know, and again there is evidence that we can show and also Better Work can show, that when these are in place, they are effective mechanisms not just for workers, but also for the factory and industry. I would shout out that listening to the first session this morning, I've been going to Bangladesh since about 1990, and it's unrecognizable. I used to come away in those days working on anti-poverty and flood with two basic reactions. One, what lovely people they were, I was always hosted so well, and a worry about where the country would go. And yet, look at it now, it's completely transformed. Not without challenges or problems, it's important to say, but that trajectory is remarkable. The other thing I would say from this morning is part of well-being is that fundamental exchange of labour for remuneration. And at the moment, under the pressure that all workers find themselves in, whether it's in Holland or the UK, certainly in places like Bangladesh and Turkey, it's important that the mechanisms that are inclusive of workers are allowed to function, and that workers and their representatives and trade unions are allowed to make their demands, and that needs to play out then through the value chain. If we don't allow that to happen, we shouldn't be talking about responsible business or sustainability. And we need to accept that in the times that we're in, real wages in many producing countries, including Bangladesh, have dropped dramatically. So that fundamental part of well-being is getting that mechanism right, supporting that mechanism, and then embracing the outcomes in the value chain. As I said, it's not just something that Bangladesh is faced with. All the production countries, I think, are faced with similar challenges. And in our experience, wherever you can create dialogue and create structures for dialogue, you're in a much better place to handle those issues than if you leave it to chance and emergency. I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks so much, Peter. Again, it's a lot of rich ideas here, and I think there's a common thread coming from this panel in particular about the importance of a voice, of workers' voice, about workers being part of the solution. So, Alexander, I'd like to turn to you, and let's think a little bit more about the private sector and the role of brands in particular. Purchasing practices, this topic we all talk about all the time. What does it actually mean? But most importantly, how does it ensure that workers across the various Bangladeshi factories are paid living wages? How do they start to tackle overtime issues? Your thoughts on all of that, please.
Thanks, Conor.
And tell us who you are.
Right. I'm Alexander Kohnstamm with the Fairwear Foundation. Not only sitting very close to Peter, but we also feel very close and are very close with ETI, multi-stakeholder, working with 140 garment brands and their factories in 10 countries where we have wonderful colleagues. I won't repeat what Peter said, agree with all of that. Let me add the perspective of the purchasing practices. And also, maybe you mentioned this morning session. I wasn't there. I had to be at the board meeting, unfortunately, but I heard that there was a strong call for wages to be increased. I think there are very reasonable demands for that. Obviously, for protection of union leaders, something I also fully support. I also don't have to repeat that, but that obviously has my full support as well. From a business point of view, why is it important to make sure that wages are increased and that people are safe, including justice for Shahidul Islam? Well, because from a business point of view, Bangladesh has come a long way, absolutely true, but there are still a lot of misconceptions. And I think part of those misconceptions are also still something for Bangladesh and Bangladesh industry to work hard on redressing. Let me tell you an anecdote of a few years ago when I met with the sustainability director, or sourcing director rather, of a large retail chain in Germany. And that person said to me, we have a sustainability line. So we have a line of goods, about 20% of his stock was sustainable label. And I saw that one of our member brands actually didn't get that label on one of their products. And I said, how can that be? I know this brand very well, extremely responsible. How can it be? Well, he said, this particular item was produced in Bangladesh. And obviously, something from Bangladesh cannot be in our responsible line. Now, that is a misconception, but it is not a misconception that comes, out of nothing. And the things that we heard about this morning, the things that we know about, do paint a picture of Bangladesh. That's not what we want to see. Responsible purchasing practices are very directly connected to this, because especially in the context of human rights due diligence legislation, but also with GSP+, with, more and more the sustainability shifting from the CSR department to the boardroom to the legal department, where reduction of risk becomes a key performance indicator. You don't want people to think of Bangladesh that way. So you don't want these things to happen. You want wages to be at a level where people can feed their families, where they can at least buy the minimum needed when they have an entry-level job. So something like, no, not something like, there's only one in its kind. The Accord and the work with the RRC is the best thing that ever happened to Bangladesh. Well, at least in CSR. Seriously, I mean, this is very good for Bangladesh business, because it will help businesses that do their due diligence, businesses that work on their purchasing practices and do risk assessment, to look at your country in a way that is reasonable, but also risk reducing. And I think that's the key part. Now, you mentioned collaborations, Conor, finally. Collaborations. Yes, of course. Brands should pay up. If minimum wage goes up, and it must, then obviously prices also will have to increase. My salary is for large part paid by brands, so I'm not afraid to say this. Purchasing practices are the most important determinant of working conditions in factories. Purchasing practices need to change, prices need to go up, lead times need to be longer, and that needs to happen in spirit of real partnership. But Bangladesh should not be afraid to improve its wages and its working conditions.
Great, thank you so much. Very powerful, real. So, Joris, I'm turning to you. The Accord is the best, and the RSC is the best thing that's happened to Bangladesh?
Yes.
At least in the sustainability sense.
Apparently.
Do you want to tell us who you are, build on that, but also add a little bit about supporting safety measures, competitiveness, business risks. So how do you get all of that right? Go.
Thanks very much, Conor. My name is Joris Oldenziel, and I'm from the International Accord, which is the successor of the infamous Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh, which started now 10 years ago. And Alexander already said it, so I don't have to say it myself, that it is the best that ever happened to Bangladesh. But it took a while for everyone to realize that, because your question about the competitiveness has been a tricky one, of course, because when we started in Bangladesh in 2013, we placed a lot of requirements upon the factories. So most of the factories had to do a lot of safety remediation, and a lot of that was also quite expensive. So on average, about $250,000 to $300,000 were needed to be invested in the factories in sprinklers, fire doors, fire alarms, structural retrofitting, electrical setups, etc., etc. So there was a lot of work to be done, and it was very challenging for the factories to do so. So we were faced with a lot of criticism. But one thing was very important to remember, and I think that's also what Alexander was alluding to, is the importance of the support from the brands. So it was not just the factories that were having to make these investments. Yes, they had to make these investments, but the brands, through the legally binding agreement that the Accord is, also made the commitment to negotiate commercial terms with their suppliers to make it also financially feasible for them to make these investments. And now, 10 years down the road, we can see that it actually has increased the competitiveness of many of those suppliers. We even see at the moment, just a couple of months ago, was an announcement made that 70 factories voluntarily wanted to join the RSC. So the RSC, the RMG Sustainability Council, is the organization that took over the work of the Accord in Bangladesh in 2020. And that's where still all the commitments from the Accord brands are being implemented in Bangladesh. But we now see that 70 factories want to join this program because they want to join and be able to produce for Accord brands and for other brands and want to have that stamp of approval from the RSC ultimately. And we also see that a lot of these factories that have high remediation rates are attracting the highest number of orders. So it really has improved, and you already mentioned it as well, Alexander, the EU human rights due diligence legislation coming up. It's already in Germany, the German Supply Chain Act. And so increasingly, compliance will have to be met in order to be able to continue to produce for these markets. Not just for the 200 Accord brands, but also for many other brands, actually all of the brands that are selling their goods here on the European market and elsewhere. So yeah, I think improving safety and competitiveness, ultimately, in the long run, it's a long shot, but go hand in hand.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. This idea of factories coming to you to voluntarily, or to the RSC to voluntarily register, to join, is powerful, right? In our world as well, vast majority of the factories that join Better Work come because the brands tell them to join Better Work. But you have that few, 5, 10% that actually come to us because they think we can help them. That's the perfect story, right? That's a great message. So, Ashish, I'm going to you, and it's this whole idea of global partnerships, brands, manufacturers, NGOs, government, trade unions, all of them mixed together. What's the secret to collaboration and to success of all of that? What are some of the challenges, but what are some of the successes when we bring all the parties together? Tell us who you are.
Yeah.
Tell us the answer.
Thank you. My name is Ashish. I'm the country director for Oxfam in Bangladesh, and working with the garment factories and on the issue of safety and just transition is something that we do, one of the many things that we do. So in terms of collaboration, first of all, it's very important to know, like, why do we need that level of collaboration when it's a matter of factories who produce material and who sells abroad? I mean, it looks very straightforward thing. But the numbers are, if you understand the numbers, there are 4.2 million garment workforce in Bangladesh, of which 2.5 million, almost 60% are women. And if you understand a little bit more, we understand that 90% of them have not even completed their intermediate schooling. Forget about, any high schooling. So when you're working with this kind of workforce and for a long time, the question is how much this whole workforce has been able to graduate from their own poverty levels. I mean, we are talking about Bangladesh graduating to a middle-income country. But if you see in the last 10 or 15 years, there is not much of a change happening in that. And when you go deeper, you understand then it is not an issue between only the employers and the employees. It is an issue of the entire ecosystem that exists there. And if you have to move the mountain, you need to have a collaboration of all the stakeholders. So that's fundamental reason. How do you go about it? I think the conviction is very much at place. Everyone knows why this industry is important to Bangladesh. The government is convinced. It contributes 15% of its GDP, and it has a potential to even grow more and connect with others. When it comes to the other collaborators or brands, everyone knows about, I mean, of course, this whole Rana Plaza has triggered things, but now we have to come out of that hangover and to see the larger safety nets doesn't exist only with the government, only with the brand owners. It exists with the consumers at large. So the awareness requires both levels, and this constituency is large. It requires its own, a grievance commission or something like that. I mean, the Asia Development Research 2021, if you read, 24% of the garment workers experience sexual harassment at the workplace. And there is no complaint because there is no complaint mechanism exist. So these are the things that I think required a large level of collaboration among everyone to move forward. I'll just stop here and we'll take more questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Ashish. lots of rich stuff there, the numbers, percentage of GDP. What I liked what you said, though, is everybody has a role. If you're going to, I think you said, if you need to move the mountain, no small task, then everybody actually has a role. I couldn't agree more. So specifically roles, Laura, I'm coming to you, and the EU. Tell us what the EU is doing to help move this mountain in Bangladesh, and what sort of role you think we should all play, but also what role should the Bangladeshi government play? Yeah. To you, Laura.
Yes, thanks very much. I'm Laura Corrado. I work for the Department of Employment and Social Affairs in the European Commission, and my unit is responsible for the promotion of labor standards. We cooperate a lot with the ILO, of course, and with many other organizations and stakeholders. So, of course, promoting fair and decent conditions is a priority for the EU, not only in the EU market, but also along the supply chain. And reference was made to the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which is being negotiated and which we are confident is going to be agreed next year. And indeed, once it will enter into force, will impose requirements to employers and business, and therefore it will be very important to be compliant, also to maintain market access to the EU. So this is really important. Of course, we also, through our trade policy, we have sustainable development tools, and indeed, as you are aware, Bangladesh has benefited a lot of our preferential trade scheme, where all tariffs and quotas are removed on everything except on arms and ammunition. So, I mean, this has contributed a lot to economic growth, but also to some progress on the social and labor field, and we welcome that. So I think also previous panelists said that the sector, the garment sector, but the whole Bangladesh economy has evolved a lot and has progressed. So there have been improvements, in particular in factory safety, as it has been also mentioned. And we have been engaging a lot with the Bangladeshi government, as the EU, as the European Commission, to ensure that in the context of our dialogue on trade. There is a national action plan that the Bangladeshi government has committed to on the labor sector, where there are a number of concrete commitments and actions, some of which have been implemented, others that still have to be implemented, and that covers all the important areas that we have mentioned so far and that linked to sustainability. So not only the safety, as I mentioned, but also prevention of harassment and violence against workers. Also, freedom of association has been mentioned, and the role of trade unions, prevention of child labor. I think this maybe has been mentioned less today, but this is also very important. So it's a number of engagements that have been made and that on which we are monitoring progress. So there has been legislative also approximation and some improvement in ratifying important ILO convention, including on preventing child labor and forced labor. Now, of course, the legislative alignment and the reform of the labor law has to continue and has to be completed. On top of that, of course, we also expect enforcement, concrete implementation on the ground by the government, but which is our, let's say, primary stakeholder counterpart, because we are, of course, an EU, but I fully agree that, and I'm impressed by also all the initiatives that have been taken by private sector, businesses, brands, with suppliers. So this is very important. Indeed, it's a collective effort. But when it comes to us, to the EU, so what we are monitoring in particular, besides, together with ILO, besides the reform of the legislation, which is very important, is also, as I mentioned, the enforcement. So the labor inspections, for example, the government of Bangladesh committed to improve that, to hire additional labor inspectors, to really provide training and to ensure that the requirements are checked in practice in the factories. Freedom of association, it has been mentioned, and the role of the trade unions. Yes, this is very important, of course, to enforce all labor rights. And this is something on which we continue recommending the government also to facilitate the establishment of trade unions and the registrations. There have been improvements in that, we acknowledge that, but this has really to continue and to be better improved. Against prevention of harassment and violence against workers, I think this is it is important, and when there are accidents and problems, they are properly investigated, and we expect the authorities to do so and to prevent other cases, of course. So I think there are a number of things that have been done in all these different aspects that I have mentioned. We have acknowledged and noted progress, but we continue to really recommend the authorities in Bangladesh to continue on that path and really to implement fully all the commitments, also in practice, not only legislation, all the commitments that they have taken. And as I said, I think we also welcome very much the engagement with really the private sector side, with the civil society, with ILO, of course, and with the trade unions as well. And I think this needs to continue. And we look forward to continue the dialogue and the cooperation with all of you. Thank you very much.
Great, brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. You picked up on many things. You highlighted the National Action Plan, that we are seeing some progress, but we've got a ways to go. And you specifically talked about the prevention of harassment, issues around freedom of association and gaps there, the need, not the desire, the need for enforcement. I think these are all very, very important elements to pick up on. So I want to ask the private sector, Mustafiz, you've heard a lot of things here from a lot of people that look in on Bangladesh, but don't necessarily live on a day-to-day involvement within the country. So what are your thoughts? And also, if I can ask you to think a little bit forward-thinking, what are some of the things that we need to make sure we collectively do to ensure that Bangladesh is an excellent sourcing destination? Just before you start, we have one more speaker, and then if we have a bit of time, I'm going to open it up and see if anyone has any questions or comments for this excellent panel. Mustafiz,
okay,
go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Sheikh H. Mustafiz. I'm the Managing Director of Q Dress Industry Limited. We are exporting to Europe, America, and many other places. And on the top of it, I'm also working in BGMEA as a chair of Standing Committee on Sustainability. So I'm heading there with all these issues relevant to how we can make Bangladesh RMG industry more sustainable. So I'm just listening carefully, and I think there are a lot of concerns, there are a lot of challenges, but I wanted to tell you there are also a lot of opportunities, and there are some good news that are also happening. You know, after this, I mean, if we talk about this 10 years back, the Rana Plaza, it was a wake-up call for all of us. It's not only for the suppliers, but also the buyers. All our stakeholders actually wake up. So they understand, they try to understand that how we can fix this, how we can make it, how we can do business responsibly. So from that point of view, we remediated and we become, you know, one of the safest RMG industry in the world, through the Accord and alliances and all the processes. And not only that, we also become the greenest factories in the world. So we have a lot of green factories in Bangladesh. So we actually leveled up ourselves in many ways. But I also wanted to give you a good news that in BGMEA and also in BKMEA, we have two associations, you know, that we also set up a responsible business hub with the cooperation from GIZ, that where actually we will be following, we'll be monitoring, we'll be training, we'll be doing all the training, capacity building for our member factories for the human rights due diligence and environmental sustainability. And not only that, from the BGMEA, we'll be launching a new website. You will be seeing maybe in next 2-3 months that where we will be showcasing how far we have been. You can see the digital information over the website, that our ESG performances of the whole industry, you can see in numbers. So that is in the process. So I think a lot of questions and a lot of concerns I learned from these panel speakers. I think you will be happy to see all the numbers, that how we are collecting all the data, also from the like SLCP, BSCI, and many brands also. They are also coming up to help us to make our industry in the next level, because everybody is looking for, we become second largest in the world, but people really wanted to produce in Bangladesh. But there are some issues with all the the bad incidents we happened. But there are a lot of things that we can really do, a big changes. It will be coming up, and you'll be happy to see that we are really going to be a destination for the global apparel sourcing. Everybody will be going there because Bangladesh will be not only the safest, not only the greenest, but also it will be the highest compliant in terms of the human rights compliance and also with the environmental sustainability. That I can promise you, and that will be happening. You can see that one. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. So a positive spin, an optimistic outlook, although still some challenges, but I think that's the way we want to go. So, wrap all of this up, sir. And we'll still have 2 minutes for the audience. So what do you, from what you've heard, tell us forward-looking, crystal ball, what does the industry of Bangladesh have going for it, and what are some of the challenges?
Good afternoon, and thank you. That's a very easy question. My name is Gerwin Leppink. I'm Europe representative, worldwide responsible accredited production, or short RAP. We are the largest independent certification body in the sewing product scene. We have 400 factories certified, meanwhile, in Bangladesh. That's 70% up after the years of Rana Plaza. So that's a big compliment to the industry. Looking forward, what does Bangladesh need? In 2 words, I would say fully compliant, being fully compliant, and transparency. We touched a little bit about hard laws. Nowadays, it's not about soft laws, not about OECD having some guidelines, or retailers' brands have some requirements. Meanwhile, since the 1st of January 2023, we have the German Supply Chain Act. What is happening in facilities in Bangladesh is partly the responsibility of the German retailer and brand. That's a huge step forward. I think that's majorly important, that retailers and brands are taking their responsibility. And if we look to Bangladesh, at the times I was running 4 buying offices in Bangladesh, I always said this is the place where volume orders with very low margin of retailers meets very large factories with low wages. And of course, that's tension. There is no money on the table for innovation. People were cutting corners. Social compliance was always an issue. Bangladesh did a tremendous thing, but now we see that retailers and brands need to mix in picking up real responsibility. So that's absolutely a hope. At the same time, if we look at the industry in Bangladesh, I got briefed from my office in Dhaka that there are over 1,000 trade unions active in Bangladesh. And only 10% is a member of a trade union. We see trade unions related to management, trade unions related to political parties. I think we need real freedom of association, real collective bargaining. Otherwise, the road, the pathway to living wages is really a difficult one. What can RAP do in this? We are independent, we certify, and you can hang something on the wall that you meet at least the minimum requirements. But I think these are points the industry needs to work on. And I know I had another question actually as well, and I like to say, hey, compliance is not a cost. It's an investment, and there's a return on investment. Otherwise, you as factory are in, at least if the European supply chain law is active, you're not relevant anymore. And then it's game over. And I think that's the reality we face, and look to organizations who can help you. If it's RAP, it's the Fairwear Foundation, it's SLCP, become active. Because if I count up how many factories are certified or audited, maybe it's half of the industry. And I think that we should do in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Great, nice way to wrap it. You mentioned due diligence, the roles of government, roles of retailers and brands, the roles of factories, all of this around, I think, going back to the beginning, the importance of collaboration. You talked about forward-looking, we have to have more effective realization and understanding of freedom of association and collective bargaining agreements. And a phrase we all know, but it probably isn't used enough, compliance is not a cost, but it's an investment. Exactly. Colleagues, I think I've got 2 more minutes. Any questions, any comments from the audience? You've all been sitting patiently. We've got some excellent people here that can answer your questions. Anyone? Otherwise, we're stopping and group photoing it, I think. Yes, please. Tell us who you are and tell us your thoughts.
Hello, I'm Janneke, and I work as a consultant advising like several companies, and we want to, expand towards doing more on human rights due diligence as well. What is the first step to get more freedom of association, and how to activate people and make sure it's safe? Like what's, I mean, it sounds very easy if you say it like that, but it's not. So where do you start?
Good, okay. The simple question around freedom of association, where do you start? Who wants to tackle it?
I'll gladly speak to it. Being able to have real worker voice influence the actions of brands is a very powerful instrument for brands to do their due diligence. It may actually, it's certainly more effective and more, no, let me keep it effective, more effective than audits, I think. We do audits, but I think having worker voice directly in the boardroom of brands during their due diligence is more powerful, might even be cheaper than audits. Business reasons. And I think actually the government of Bangladesh and other production countries should see the opportunity of making trade unions part of the value chain, rather than some people seeing them as a nuisance. Having real social dialogue, as the ILO Better Work has shown, and Peter referred to, is actually good for business, and it's certainly good for due diligence. So it's a business imperative as well as a human rights one. I don't know if it's simple, but...
No, very good. I'm looking at the time. Does anyone else have one last question? In the back there, please. Yes? Oh, yes. Aha. You need a microphone, Jos.
Probably not.
Or maybe not, actually. You could just sing it out.
Thank you. My name is Jos Huber. I'm retired now, but I had an experience in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Development Cooperation, also with Bangladesh, Better Work, etc. I have a question for the representative of the European Commission. And you spoke about the GSP program. This program has a certain history already in Bangladesh. And I was just wondering, can you say something about the progress that came because of actions of the European Commission? And are there certain moments when the European Commission really wants to bite? Thank you.
There you go, Laura. Last question for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I mean, I explained very, very briefly before that I think, the fact that Bangladesh is the main beneficiary, actually, of our EBA scheme of preferences is behind also a lot of the growth of the exports of Bangladesh, but also of the social progress that in the labor condition, because we have this program, and now they are part of what we call the EBA Plus, so we are monitoring the respect of certain ILO conventions in particular, and we have pushed them to ratify not only the one concerning the prevention of child labor, but also forced labor. So this is also the result of the enhanced engagement that we have had with Bangladesh. And the government has prepared this action plan as part of also being part of these preferential trade schemes that we have asked them to commit on a number of aspects, as I have explained. So we are in the process of monitoring this, the progress on this action plan. The Bangladeshi government has to report to us every 6 months. We will be planning a mission there. Now, I cannot give any date because we are still discussing, but on the ground in Bangladesh to really see to meet the authorities, but also see the situation of the factories on the ground. So we are monitoring very closely, and we are in a constant dialogue with the government about all the issues that we have been discussing today about labor rights. And of course, the continuation of preferential schemes is linked also to these progresses. So we continue the engagement and the cooperation with the Bangladeshi authorities, and we expect them to stick to their commitments as part also of being part of our preferential schemes of preferences. So I don't know if this is biting. I mean, we see this as an engagement with the authorities. They have been quite responsive so far, I would say, but of course we will continue following up on the commitments that I have made. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, I'm officially out of past time, so we're going to stop there. I want to thank my colleagues on the panel. As you can see very well, some excellent experiences and expertise, and I think a committed passion to making all things right in Bangladesh and our industry. So thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you. Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Conor. Thank you so much. Let's extend our heartfelt to these panel speakers for sharing their slides.